Glick, we're back after a couple of weeks for the Jewish high holidays that we were in a hiatus. We're back with the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. I'm here with my co-host, Gadi Taub. Hey, Gadi.
Carolyn, every time you say it's Carolyn Glick, you look like you're surprised that it's Carolyn Glick, like you didn't expect it.
Well,
it's a different thing if you don't expect me, but you. Well,
look, it's because it's not my married name. We were just discussing this off camera, that my real name is Carolyn Glick Suissa, but people would say, who is that? So I am a little bit surprised, you know. It's an alias. Yeah, it's a pen name now. But
so how were the holidays?
They were good. They were good. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm wearing a sheath because of all of the weight that we've put on with all of the roasts and the chickens and the roasts and the chickens and the honey cakes and the carrot cakes and the apple cakes. But aside from that, everything is great. And the kids were back in school. Now one of the kids is back in school and the other one is back in quarantine. And, we're all good. And
I just
how
saw
about
this
you?
video.
How were thy holidays in Tel Aviv?
In Tel Aviv, well, you know, I'm not observant, so I am. For me, the whole Corona time is very much like the Chagim. It's everything is quiet outside and everything inside is much the same. I saw this video about an observant Jew who was trying to explain to someone. It's a satirical video. It's not a real one, of trying to find a date to meet in September. It's like it's absolutely impossible. We had 5 days of school
work
but also for kids had only 5 days that they went to school this month, right, in September.
Something like that, and they still managed to get 100,000 of them in quarantine for exposure to COVID. So yeah, it was very necessary to have those at 5 days.
While the press here is celebrating normality, I think normality is probably the word of the watchword of the hour here. Israel is probably in its craziest phase ever with the post-Zionist. Completely, we say metulalim. It's a word that says crazy, but is really much more forceful. And they're marketing themselves as normality. So the school year opens, although we've had how many? About 1,200 unnecessary COVID deaths since they wouldn't do anything. And now we are having a normal school year. I'm going to teach back in the campus after almost 2 years. Actually meet students. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I know. I went to a conference with my son's teacher. She's the same teacher that he had last year, and it was the first time that we had ever seen her, you know, outside of Zoom. So yeah, it was quite something. But look, I mean, we are living in crazy times. I just saw that there's a new mutation of corona that appeared in San Francisco. It was just a headline that I read that says that, and it's completely immune to the vaccines. It's totally, it's like a super corona that you can get no matter how many boosters you've had or whatever. So I think, unfortunately, that we're never going to get out of this. I mean, I don't want to say it because I think, you know, about our kids' future. You know, they won't know life without face masks. You know, we were at the school yesterday and we had to wear the face masks. I think I was there for 20 minutes before I figured out an excuse to leave. And it was because I can't stand wearing face masks. I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way. I absolutely detest wearing face masks. It's totally, totally uncomfortable for me. And our children have to be in school from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon wearing face masks. I mean, I don't understand that. We're talking about first graders, you know, and all ages in between. And I don't know what sort of joke this is, but you can't learn anything.
How reliable is what you read about San Francisco? Is this still a rumor, or is this?
It's as reliable as everything about Corona. I mean, that's the thing, is that people forcefully tell you one thing, and then other people, you know, on the other side of the spectrum tell you forcefully everything else. And since the science on all of these things is exactly 5 minutes old, you don't know who to trust. You know, it's your experts against the other guy's experts, and you don't really have any experts because you never even heard of this stuff 15 minutes ago. And you're stuck trying to figure out what in the world you're supposed to do. And I think that, the feeling of helplessness and frustration, and then trying to rely on the way things were before, you just don't know whether that's reasonable or whether you're going to be endangering your kids. It's hard for people to take care of themselves. It's hard for them to take care of their kids. It's hard for them to know what to do with their parents. I mean, it's all miserable. At any rate, why don't we talk about things that we are experts in? What do you think of that? Because I don't like talking about things that everybody watching can say, well, I have an opinion and I'll absolutely put my money on the table that they're worth more than mine. And so why would you listen to Carolyn talking about things that she's not an expert at? Why don't you talk to Carolyn about things that I know very, very well?
Like Israeli politics.
Like Israeli politics and like anti-Semitism studies 101 in the United States. And I think, why don't we start this week's show with the extraordinary presentation of where the Democrat Party now stands on Jews and anti-Semites, because I think it's important. And we saw two very vivid expressions of where the party now stands in relationship to anti-Semitism. The first was with the Squad's opposition to supplemental funding for Iron Dome missiles, anti-ballistic missiles, the missile shield that protects Israel from Hamas missiles, from Islamic Jihad missiles, from Fatah missiles, and from Hezbollah missiles. And then we had that incredible exchange between the vice president of the United States and a student at George Mason University. And I think both of them are very telling about the state of anti-Semitism in the Democrat Party. Can
you say to our viewers, like in a nutshell, what it was that the student and Kamala Harris were talking about? Because
I think it's important to first start with the Iron Dome thing, because it was playing off of that. So if we start with the Iron Dome and then we move to Kamala, then both of them make more sense. So what happened was that, in May, Hamas shot off in 10 days 4,360 missiles at Israel. That's rockets, mortars, and missiles that can reach Tel Aviv from Gaza, which is a distance of about 70 miles, something like that.
Yep.
So this is significant. This is over 400 missiles a day being shot at Israel from Gaza. And Israel has this Iron Dome program together with the United States. It's a joint Israeli-U.S. program. Most of the technology is Israeli, and the manufacturing is in the United States. And this is a completely defensive project that a lot of Israelis, including myself, really oppose on a philosophical level, because by having it, it enables the government not to make any strategic decisions about what we're supposed to do vis-a-vis Gaza. And also it leaves them immune from Israeli offensive attacks, because why would we go on offense against Hamas or Hezbollah, for that matter, when we can just protect ourselves with these missile shields? So they get to develop hundreds and hundreds of thousands of missiles to shoot
to saturate the system.
To saturate the system, and then we spend, and each mortar that they shoot off at Israel costs, like somewhere between $50 and $1,000. And each Iron Dome missile that we shoot back at them costs around $75,000. So that the costs here are insane. The amount of money that we have to put into these anti-rocket missiles and et cetera, it would be much cheaper economically and more effective militarily if we were at least to combine our defensive operations with offensive ones. But be that as it may, that's why Democrats should really like, and do in fact like, along with the Israeli left, the Iron Dome system, because it immunizes Israel's terrorist enemies from Israeli offenses. Because why should Israel attack Hamas when it can just protect itself with Iron Dome? At any rate, just sort of showing their hand, their incredible animosity towards Israel, the Squad, led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, said that they didn't want to vote that they would not vote for the omnibus spending bill, which is like a continuing resolution for the budget in the United States that's supposed to keep the federal government open. And so the idea was to put these $1 billion that President Biden had pledged to Israel to replenish the supply of the missiles that Israel had to shoot in order to protect its population centers in May, that they weren't going to vote for it because they didn't want to support Israel. And really, by saying we're not going to support Iron Dome, which again is just, I mean, people like myself don't like it because it forces Israel into a defensive posture against Hamas. They're saying we actually don't want Israel to be able to defend itself against Hamas's missile attacks. We want more Israelis to die. We are for Palestinian terrorists. We are for these jihadists, this Muslim Brotherhood terrorist organization, as it carries out indiscriminate missile warfare against Jews. And that's what they said, right? That was their message. We won't fund the replenishment of the stocks of these defensive missiles. Okay. And you might have expected people who are traditionally pro-Israel, like Steny Hoyer, who's the majority leader in the House of Democrats, or Nancy Pelosi, to stand up to them and say, you should be ashamed of yourself. You know, this is completely outrageous. How can you not support Iron Dome? No, this won't stand. And condemn them or censure them or whatever, make them pay some sort of a price publicly for actively siding with Hamas and their missile war against Israel. But instead, we got complete silence on that. Steny Hoyer spoke with Foreign Minister Yair Lapid and said, this is really just a technical problem. There's nothing to it. What we're going to do is we're going to put it in a separate bill. We're not going to do it with the omnibus budget bill. We're just going to put it in a separate. Now, why did they want to do that? Because the Republicans support supplemental funding for Iron Dome, right? So then they didn't have to worry. There's only so that's the other thing that I guess I have to explain is that they weren't going to get any Republican votes for the supplemental budget deal because it includes, a bazillion dollars, literally, in funding social programs that are socialist. And so the Republicans.
But I heard the Democrats say that it's not going to cost money. Did you hear that one?
Yeah, but that was something else. That's their overall infrastructure.
The infrastructure bill, the 1.5 trillion that are going to be free or whatever. Right, 3.5 was it?
It's 3.5 trillion. So yeah, because obviously 3.5 trillion, zero, they're the same, right? I mean, what's the difference between 3.5 trillion and zero? I mean, just 3.5 trillion.
Did you see the Babylon Bee on that? They had one story about a wife coming back home to her husband and saying to him that her 3.5 trillion shopping spree in the mall is going to cost nothing.
Exactly. Because it's true. It's true. I mean, really, that's what democratic economics are all about. You just print more money. The fact that then money is worthless never seems to have occurred to them because history is whatever they say it is, right? And they can rewrite it so that they're rewriting history of everything. Why can't they just rewrite history of the 70s inflation or hyperinflation in Germany in the 1930s? I mean, there's no problem. At any rate, so the Democrats wanted this big, fat spending bill that they weren't going to get any Republican support for. So they needed every single Democrat to vote for it. And when you had the 9 members or whatever of the squad saying they weren't going to vote for it, then they knew that their budget wouldn't pass and the federal government would shut down. So they said, okay, we're going to take it out. They didn't call them out. They didn't insist that, they didn't bang on the table and say, you have to vote for this. No, they just took it out because then they said, okay, then we can get the Republicans to vote for it. And so that's what they did. And this was a very substantive thing because it said that the Democrats, and not for the first time, the leadership, Steny Hoyer, Nancy Pelosi, the head of the foreign relations, I think his name is Meeks, and other very senior Democrat lawmakers in the House will not call out Cortez or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or Ayanna Pressley or whatever her name is, the woman from Washington State who's the head of the Progressive Caucus.
And what's your take on that dynamic? Why can't they muster the courage, the moral authority to say stop to all they say so many idiotic things apart from anti-Semitism? Because
the progressives are the Progressive Caucus in the House has, I think it's 85 members, and swing state or swing districts, whatever, centrist Democrats who have to worry about what Republicans think of them, there are only 56 seats like that. So that the balance of power inside of the party is very much in the hands of the progressives, and that progressives themselves are led by the squad. So that they are the power in the party. And so when people say, well, they're the minority in the party, they're not the minority in the party, they're the majority in the party, they control the party. And so I think, Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and all of the rest of these octogenarians who are the heads of the party today, including Biden, are afraid of them because they are the power behind the throne. And if they start going after them, then they won't have, then they're going to risk their leadership positions. I mean, Nancy Pelosi had to make a deal with the squad in order to get reelected Speaker of the House. So I think, in 2018. So I think that this is very much an issue of the balance of power in the party. So,
but isn't it also an issue of, and we see this happening in Israel and elsewhere, that radicals get to be the judges, they get to be the moral authority because of their alleged purity, because they take things to extreme. And so there's a dynamic, and we saw this on the Israeli left, of everybody, those are still Zionists, are like looking aside to get a nod from the post-Zionists that they are radical enough, that their moral credentials are weighty enough. Is that not part of the dynamic there?
Well, I think that you get that dynamic. It's much easier to be a purist than to be a centrist, right? I mean, that's true probably on the right as well. But I think, here the problem is, first of all, the power dynamic, that the progressives really have captured the majority of Democratic seats. And I think that they're very much the power in the Democrat Party, and that has to be accepted because it's true. And people are trying to hide that. And the other thing is that I think that while there are only, 8 or 9 members of the Progressive Caucus who are willing to openly advocate anti-Semitic positions, I wrote about it in my Israel Hayom article from last Friday that you can see on my, it's a first article up on my website right now, carolynglick.com, that these ostensibly more sympathetic towards Israel progressives have just put out this bill called the Two-State Act, or the Two-State Solution Act. It's sponsored by Andy Levin, who is a J Street guy, Carl Levin's son, actually, from Michigan. And he's very, very radically anti-Israel. And this, under the headline Two-State Solution, what this bill actually does is it guts the U.S. alliance with Israel. It guts Israel's strategic independence and undermines U.S. military ties with Israel. And it also massively empowers Palestinian terrorists. It enables the Palestinians to continue sponsoring and financing terrorism, and at the same time receive U.S. financial assistance, and also reopen the PLO office in Washington. And this is all against the 1987 anti-terrorism law. So Andy Levin, this ostensibly pro-Israel, pro-peace J Street Democrat, and 24 co-sponsors, 7 of them are actually Jewish Democrats, are pushing this bill forward that is even more devastating to U.S.-Israel relations and to Israel's strategic position, and much more supportive of Palestinian terrorism than we've ever seen before. And they're doing this as progressives, so that it's only 8 or 9 of the progressives that are willing to openly support Palestinian terrorists against Israel and to demonize Jewish Americans who support Israel. But out of a caucus of 85 members, probably you have the majority of them that are willing, with a very, small fig leaf hiding them, to push a deeply, deeply pro-Palestinian terrorist agenda against Israel. So,
which they are able to market to most American Jews as just and balanced.
And pro-peace.
Yeah, and they're marketing it as, as if this were 1937 and we were with the Peel Commission that said, there are 2 national movements here, so it makes sense to give them both homelands for self-determination. And it completely ignored, I was a supporter of the Two-State Solution until it was disproven by facts. And this is, and if you look at the American press, if you look at the New York Times, for instance, they're still selling this as if it were really possible after all we've learned about the Palestinian national movement. And Shlomo Avineri of the Israeli left wrote, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, that that Zionism kept seeing the Palestinian national movement in its own image, and imagined that the Palestinian national movement too seeks political self-determination, and it doesn't seek that. It seeks territorial resettlement of the descendants of the refugees, which means the destruction of Israel. I don't know if you saw Memory today. Memory, the Middle East Media Research Institute, they published the Hamas in Gaza had a conference about how things should be run after Palestine is liberated from the Jews, after the destruction of Israel. And it had a whole series of clauses saying how would they deal with the Jews. So the Jews who are warriors would be self-evidently killed. Others who wish to run away, depending, some should be let go, and others should be brought to justice. And it said we should forcefully keep all the brain trust of the Jews, people who are good in agriculture, technical things, medicine, and all that should be forcefully made to remain in Palestine. So they're saying it. The Hamas covenant, which they now hide, calls for the murder of every Jew. The Palestinians have never agreed to any sort of partition. And the New York Times and following it, in America, the hierarchy is much stronger than it is, I think, here. And everyone follows it. Like the whole press in America follows the lead of this thing as if this is still a viable option. It is not a viable option. Read Adi Schwartz and Inat Wilf, The War of Return, and you would see that the Palestinian national movement centers around the destruction of Israel, not around its own independence.
Right. And, you're speaking to something that I also talked about in my article last week, which is that, there is this theoretical ideal of a two-state solution that was the animating force behind the Israeli peace camp, right? Behind people like yourself, where you have this idea that, there are two sides.
People like I used to be. Yeah.
Right. But that you're trying to reach some kind of a compromise, right? And so, and Shlomo Ben Ami talks about this as well, that there would be some line that they would accept, right? That, the ideal for Zionist Israeli leftists, when they talk about the two-state solution, is probably, along the lines of what Tzipi Livni was talking about in 2008 when she was having these negotiations with Abu Mazen and with Condoleezza Rice, which is that Israel would keep the major Jewish population centers in Judea and Samaria, where I live, in Gush Etzion, the city of Ariel, some other places that would all, and Barak also talked about this at Camp David in 2000. They all add up to around, 5% of Judea and Samaria, and we would, in larger versions of it, we would maintain our control over the Jordan Valley, and more limited ones, we would have some sort of condominium of interest there. But the whole idea was that and Jerusalem, they would reach some kind of administrative solution there. So there's this idea that we could reach a deal. But the Palestinians were never party to that, and they never agreed to that. There was never any Palestinian constituency for that. There was never any Palestinian leadership that would have supported that. So it was all kind of in our heads. Now, we were telling ourselves that this existed because we wanted it to exist, and we projected our own logic and our own rationale on the other side and never listened to them. And, the main argument of people on the right, like myself, was that, you can't do this because you're not listening to them. You're not negotiating with them. You're negotiating with yourself. But that's not how it works, because the whole idea of a two-state solution is predicated on resolving the conflict. And, what Ehud Barak called the final resolution of the conflict. We were going to reach a final resolution. It was going to be a peace treaty. There was going to be a peace. The Palestinians never accepted this. They never agreed to this. It was never part of their lexicon. It was all just Jews talking to each other. And So, and even today, still today, Khalil Shkaki came out just in time for my column with an opinion poll of the Palestinians. 62% of them oppose the two-state solution, and nobody even defined it for them, right? They just said no. And 54% of them support armed struggle, which means a terrorist war against Israel. So, this is what they say, and they've always said this. And the people who support the two-state solution in Israel still today suffer from the exact same problem that they had in the 1990s, which is that they simply weren't listening to the Palestinians. They weren't, and
they have this. When you mention this, they say, "Oh, that's what they say for internal propaganda reasons." That's not the truth. That's what they say.
When has anybody made excuses like this for the other side? They won't make any excuses, of course, for people who actually take them seriously.
And what kind of excuse is it if you say that this is what you say to get elected among the Palestinians? If that's what you have to say to get elected, then this is what the Palestinians want.
No, and they don't want to listen. They simply don't want to listen. And even, and I always go back to the stories, I don't even like to talk about it, but I probably should more. So, when I was in the talks, one of the chief Palestinian interlocutors was this guy named Mohammed Dakhlan, who was the head of the security forces in the Gaza Strip. And, he was very cool. He was urbane. He spoke pidgin Hebrew. He had spent many years in Israeli prison and terrorism charges. And so all of the Israelis loved him because they thought that since, like the generals, they thought that since he had Hebrew, that he was on our side. But while he was negotiating with us, he was also Yasser Arafat's conduit to the head of Hamas, Mohammed, wasn't Mohammed Def.
It was the spiritual head was Yassin, and then,
no, it was Mohammed Def. It was Mohammed Def. It was when it was Mohammed Def. They were in prison together, and they were friends. So it was Dakhlan and Def were good friends, and this was in the 1990s. It was 1994, and he was the interlocutor between Arafat and Yassin. He and Def. So this should tell you everything that you need to know about Mohammed Dakhlan, that he became very close friends with the head of Hamas while he was in Israeli prison learning pidgin Hebrew, right? But instead of focusing on that, which was the most important thing to understand about Dakhlan, the Israeli negotiators focused on the pidgin Hebrew, which was the least important thing to recognize because you had to put it into context. Why did he speak Hebrew? He spoke Hebrew because he was in an Israeli prison. Why was he in an Israeli prison? Because he was a terrorist, right? And so these kinds of things were never the focus because the Israeli negotiators wanted to believe that Mohammed Dakhlan was our friend, and he totally was not. He was completely not. Right at the same time that he was meeting with us, he was meeting with Def, and they worked out modus operandi between Fatah and Hamas, that Hamas would only carry out terrorist attacks in areas that the Palestinian Authority didn't govern. Okay, so that they wouldn't get in trouble. And then, followed that was Nachshon Wachsman, an IDF corporal, his kidnapping and murder at the hands of Hamas in Bir Nabala, which is a suburb of Ramallah, and a whole bunch of suicide bombings inside of Israel. And people didn't want to make the connection. I'm talking about the Israeli leadership did not want to make the connection between Mohammed Dakhlan, their pal in the negotiations, who spoke pidgin Hebrew, and the terrorist attacks that were taking place at the hands of Dakhlan's former prison friend and interlocutor, Mohammed Def. And so that's how deep the denial went. At any rate, at this point, for the vast majority of Israelis, this is no longer deluding themselves into believing that there's a possibility for peace with the Palestinian Authority, with Fatah. Obviously, with Hamas is no longer an option. Of course, nobody told anybody in our government about that, but still, that is a sense of the Israeli public. And in the United States, on the other hand, going back to the Democrat Party, so they realize that's the thing about Andy Levin's bill and the thing about the opposition to Iron Dome that's so telling, right? Because they do understand that the two-state solution as a means for peace, the way that Israeli peaceniks viewed it all along, is a non-starter. And so it's very notable that his two-state solution act, with 24 co-sponsors, 7 of whom are also Jewish, right? So a third of the co-sponsors are Jewish Democrats. It's very telling that their two-state solution act is simply about opposing Israel and supporting Palestinian terrorism against Israel, because that means that the progressives in the United States have internalized the Palestinian perception of the two-state solution, because to the extent that you have Palestinian support for the two-state solution, like ostensibly you had from Yasser Arafat in 1993, it's not as a means to an end. It's not the way that people like Shimon Peres and others promised, or Yossi Beilin, that this was going to lead to a resolution of the Palestinian conflict with Israel and to peace. No, no, no. For them, this is a stepping stone. Just as they pocketed the Gaza Strip after Israel left in 2005, and they used it to improve their bases for conducting further warfare against Israel, right? Now they can shoot mortars not only at Gush Katif, which no longer exists, the Israeli settlement area inside of Gaza that was destroyed by Israel when we left in 2005, and at Sderot and other border towns, they can shoot all the way to Jerusalem from Gaza. They can shoot all the way to Tel Aviv. They can even shoot to Hadera, which is, on the way to the north. They have over 5 million Israelis now in range of their rockets and their missiles from Gaza. So they use the concession to pocket it. And moreover, Hamas now, in the last round of war, not only did they attack Israel directly from Gaza, but they did something that was unprecedented, which was that they openly colluded with their Israeli Arab supporters who worked as a fifth, called? The fifth column inside of Israel, and carried out pogroms and riots against Israelis in mixed Jewish Arab towns and on the highways to impede military operations, which was a sign of things to come. So, their idea is that if Israel withdraws from Judea and Samaria and parts of Jerusalem in the framework of a two-state solution along the lines that Levin and his comrades in the Progressive Caucus lay out in their bill, then they'll be able to use all of the areas, my house and Efrat, everywhere else, to attack what's left of Israel. And not only are they going to do that, but the now people who now call themselves Palestinians, the Israeli Arabs, right, they're going to join the fight, so that the center of gravity is going to move to the Galilee and to the Negev, and to the coastal plain, where you have mixed Israeli Arab communities, and their expectation is that the battle is going to be joined by them in a very major way. So this is really the end point of this two-state solution for the Palestinians, as you said. It's not just a law of, not just a right of return, so-called, which is unlimited foreign Arab immigration into Israel. It's Israel being overrun by its own Arab citizens, along with the Palestinians in their areas that Israel withdraws from.
I have a growing dark foreboding about the future of relations inside Israel. I think that if we don't wake up soon, we are heading into something that can escalate into a full civil war between Jews and Arabs, something that can be worse than the 1930s, because what we've seen here in Israel is were pogroms in May. These were pogroms, and the media completely deny it. They said violence on both sides is what they call it, and the result is that those who initiated and participated in the pogroms have learned the lesson that the Jewish state would not protect itself. So I think they are being emboldened, and now by this progressive government with a little kippah at the top, which is denying all these things and talking about violence in the Arab sector, as if this is just a problem of crime and not just a problem of a collapse of state authority and sovereignty. The result would be that these people will be emboldened. They have a lot of illegal weapons, which the state is too chicken to even begin collecting, and the lesson they've learned and what they internalized, since we're living in this rough neighborhood, is that there is no one at home, and they can do what they want, and the next wave may be far more violent and including much more firearms.
Oh, I agree with
Many
you.
more
I agree with
firearms.
you completely. I do want to go back for a second to the United States because I think it's important, and we have a lot of audience members who are in the United States, and so, you know, the Iron Dome that we were just talking to, and then we explain what the actual meaning of the two-state solution is. When they talk about it now, they're not talking about the pie in the sky view of the Israeli left and their fantasy version of the two-state solution. They're talking about something else. They're talking about the Arab view of the two-state solution, which is a means to annihilate the Jewish state. And so that, I think, is the most important thing. And this is what the progressives are supporting, both by opposing, you know, the supplemental funding for Iron Dome, but also in their own ideal for what an American policy towards Israel and the Palestinians would be, which is complete American support for Palestinian terrorists and no American support for Israel. And I think that that's important. People should take a deep dive in. Well, I mean, obviously, you should read my column, which sort of summarizes the Levin bill, but it's also worth looking at the Levin bill. I read the whole thing, and it's really alarming because it shows where the progressives really are today, and they're very hateful of Israel and very, very supportive of Palestinian terrorism against Israel and Palestinian terrorist organizations. And then that brings us to Kamala Harris. And like I said, you can't really, I mean, you can, but it's good to get this context for what then just happened to her last week at George Mason. And actually, my colleagues from the Center for Security Policy, Victoria Coates, co-wrote a column about this with Congressman Chip Roy that just appeared in Newsweek today. I'll be posting that on Twitter and on Facebook later today. But she was going there to, I don't know, have some sort of powwow with the students, and this female student said to her that it hurts her heart that the Congress just passed this bill supporting Israel because Israel is committing ethnic genocide. And by the way, she said ethnic genocide just like America did. So not only is Israel committing genocide, but America is a genocidal power. And I think that bears discussion. And I'll actually be talking about that a bit in my column for the weekend for Israel Ayom. But
that's amazing how progressives the world over, and especially in the United States, are willing, instead of beating their own chest to purify their conscience, are always willing to beat the chest of the Jewish state. Anti-Semitism has become now a means for cleansing your conscience about your own sins. It's mind-boggling how a form of racism has become for these people a form of absolving themselves from racism.
You're right. So what she said was, let me just give you the exact quote because I think it's worth noting. She said here, just a few days ago, there were funds allocated to continue backing Israel, which hurts my heart because it's an ethnic genocide and it's the same thing that happened in America. And then Harris says to her that she was glad that the student, shared her views. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but Clinton in 1992, when he was first running for president, he had what everybody referred to as his Sister Souljah movement, which is where he was speaking to a African-American audience, I think in Harlem, and this woman said something very hateful about America or white people. I don't even remember what. It's just known as a Sister Souljah movement moment when Clinton stood up to her and called her out for being a bigot. And it was a very big deal on his road to the Democrat nomination and on the presidency because it presented him as a moderate Democrat. At any rate, so Kamala Harris did not have her Sister Souljah movement with her party's bigoted wing of progressives. Instead, she said, she was glad that she shared her views. And then she said, quote, "This is about the fact that your voice, your perspective, your experience, your truth should not be suppressed." Okay, it should not be suppressed. Now, imagine if the woman had the student had said to her, look, it hurts my heart that the American embassies abroad are posting rainbow flags, because I think, particularly transgenders, I think that they're sexually deviant and that they should be kept away from children. Can you imagine Kamala Harris saying to her, this is about your truth, and it's important that you express your truth and your feelings.
These people, and I think we discussed this. I don't know if we'll have time for it here, but these people are willing to employ the police in order to shut down politically incorrect ideas. Now that maybe we'll talk about it later, as I said, the FBI is going to be mobilized against parents protesting critical race theory in schools. And they're always portraying themselves as pluralistic, but of course they're willing to listen only to one kind of voice.
This is
and there's a philosophical level to it also, because it all rests on what is this idea that you have the right to your own truth. This is a postmodern paradigm in which there is no truth. And then there are only opinions. And what this always means everywhere, once you let go of the idea of truth, there is only force. Read Foucault, he supports it, but nevertheless says something very revealing. If there is no objective reality, then you only have force to decide issues, and this is the thing they grew up on, they were nurtured on in the universities, and now they've reached the final Nietzschean conclusion that force will be the arbiter of ideas, and they're willing to use it to shut down everyone. All this under this rainbow talk of we're more pluralistic because everyone has their own truth. After everyone has their own truth, the state has its own truth, and then the state's truth is what they're going to enforce.
Exactly. I mean, and it's totally antithetical to the very notion that, all of the founding ideas that the United States was actually based on, rather than slavery, which it was not based on, right? Everything was based upon this idea of limited government, of citizens being able to go out and fight it out in the marketplace of ideas freely, and sell their wares. And here they're saying, no marketplace of ideas, we're shutting you down. We're going to go after mommies and daddies who don't want their children to be indoctrinated in public schools into believing that, certain races are better than the others. And if you're whitey, well, then you should really be careful, especially if you're a boy, and especially if you're a boy who doesn't like to wear dresses, right? And God forbid likes to play with play guns. So, all of these things are happening right now in the United States. And here's the vice president saying to an out-and-out anti-Semite. I mean, the State Department's definition of anti-Semitism includes accusing Israel of genocide as an example of contemporary anti-Semitism, right? And I think it's notable, and I think it's important to note. And I said it last week on television here. That she made this statement on the 80th anniversary of the massacre of Jews at Babi Yar, right, where you had 37,000 Jews murdered in the space of a couple of days. They're just shot into open pits in the largest mass grave in world history, I think. And here she is accusing Israel of doing that, of being Nazi Germany, of committing ethnic genocide, which is a total falsity. And the vice president of the United States of America says to her, I'm glad you shared your truth with me. This is far worse than what I remember, whatever unmemorable thing that Sister Souljah said to then candidate Clinton. And here's Vice President Kamala Harris. And so what does this tell us about, just to sort of square this circle or whatever, end this thing, is that what does it tell us about where the Democrat Party is on anti-Semitism? And she should have called her out, right? She should have said, how dare you say such a despicable thing, first of all, about your own country, the United States, and second of all, about our closest ally, Israel, in the Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East, and our most stable strategic ally because they share our values and our interests. How dare you say these things? It's a total lie. You're projecting what the Palestinians are onto their victims, the Jews. But instead of doing that, she said, we're so pleased that you shared your truth. Why would she do that?
I think my last comment on this is that Kamala Harris is, she's I guess saying that she's an intellectual lightweight is a great understatement. So she's kind of a bellwether. I don't think she would understand anything that we've said about all the different levels of this. But because she's such a bellwether, she expresses the instinctive, what is now considered the common sense, the middle of the road democratic spirit. So these people, so it's no longer valid to talk about the squad as the far wing, because they're dictating the spirit to such an extent that when Kamala Harris is forced to react on the spot to something like this is what comes out of her mouth. This is instinctively. And I think, judging by the way she phrased herself, I think she at least understood that there was a sensitive issue coming up, and she tried to say what's safe, something that is safe. And this is what seems to her to be safe to say.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't know whether she's intelligent or not, and I don't want to comment on that. She is a bellwether, though. I mean, when she was in the Senate, she had great ratings with AIPAC. You know, she was just like everybody else. She'd vote for military assistance to Israel and all the rest of it. And she had a good rating, and she came to AIPAC. And then when that started going out of style, she stopped going to AIPAC, and she started going to J Street and all the rest of it. And I think that you're right. I think that she is giving a sense of things. But I also think, you know, again, it goes back to Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer covering for the anti-Semitism of the squad, and then Andy Levin serving as a fig leaf to push forward with a full-blown plan to screw Israel completely and to side 100% with Palestinian terrorists against Israel, or to the limit allowed by U.S. law. You know, and you see these actions being taken by the progressives, who again really do control the party today to a large degree. I think it was Gerald Sieb wrote about it in the Wall Street Journal. I read the other day when he was saying there is no center anymore because of the way that districts have been gerrymandered by state legislatures. So you see that there are very, very few. The number of swing districts had gone down by more than 50% since 1997. And so people live in these bubbles that don't enable any ideological compromise. And the people who get to decide what's going to happen or what isn't going to happen in the party are the people who are most decisive. And the people who are most decisive are the people who are most radical. And those are the people who are in control of the Democrat Party, and they are very anti-Semitic. And so Kamala Harris, who is number 2, she's the second highest elected official in the United States of America, she kowtows to them, whether out of agreement, if she cares, if she has any, you know, moral fiber, and this is something that moves her, or more likely out of either fear or opportunism, because that's, you know, the side that her bread is buttered on. So, you know, I think that this is a very disturbing thing that Israelis and American Jews need to contend with. And I know, you know, there are some efforts by some American Jewish organizations to try to fight the anti-Semitism in the Democrat Party, but, you know, it's very tepid, and it's very uncertain and unwilling to really go to the mattresses on this. But, you know, if this isn't stopped, and it's no longer, it can't be nipped in the bud anymore, because it's full flower now, you know, and it's only going to get, you know, like Jack and the Beanstalk pretty soon. It's going to go up to the sky. And if they don't start fighting it in a very, very serious, no holds barred way, they're going to be even less empowered to defend themselves than they are today. And today they are really being largely disenfranchised, at least in the Democrat Party. And it is a very, very, very disconcerting thing. And so I think, you know, this should be the top issue of concern for American Jews. But of course, unfortunately, and in a signal of where American Jews themselves are going, you see that it is far from the top issue on their agenda. And if, unfortunately, so long as we have this government in Israel, you're not going to get any leadership from Israel on it either.
Yeah. Israel has gone, I'd say, even further now, at least
I
in
don't
the
know.
government.
What do you
We
mean?
have. I mean that now we have Ram in the government.
Right.
We have. It's more radical than the radical wing of the Democratic Party in terms of internal Israeli affairs, because even the Squad will not say about America what Ram would say about Israel. This
I don't know. They
is
say some pretty terrible things about the United States, Gadi.
I don't see that they have a plan to annihilate it. Although they're going to destroy the bedrock of its values. But here you have like an almost declared enemy. This is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood who is now inside the government. So you have a government that is not just anti-national, but it is anti-Jewish nationalism in particular. This is a very extreme thing to have these people in the government. And by the way, Netanyahu also toyed with this idea, which I thought was horrible. But now you have a combination of Netanyahu wanted to form some kind of partnership or temporary partnership within a solid right-wing bloc, but this is a left-wing government that's leaning in the end. It's like, I'll give you an example what I would consider such a thing in America. If the American Communist Party was part of now the Democratic Party in an overt way. And let me remind you, I'm not going to absolve the Democratic Party of all its sins, but it rejected a candidate that said he was socialist. So although
not really,
they wouldn't have him for a presidential candidate.
Yeah, but I mean, Bernie Sanders very much is a kingmaker, and he determines the policies. I mean, look at the people who Biden is appointing. He made a deal with Bernie's supporters who said, you guys are going to get a place at the table. And you look at the Department of Justice, and you look at the White House, and you look at the State Department, and you see that Bernie Sanders supporters, and they are in decision-making positions in the Biden administration. You have some person who's now responsible for banking policy in the Treasury, who is a graduate of a Soviet university, and she received the Lenin Award. And I mean, she is an open, out-and-out communist, and now she's in charge of regulating American banks.
Yeah, that's a pretty extreme example, but still,
there are lots of examples like her.
But still, would you? The reason I'm finding it hard to make a full comparison is that you don't need a coalition government in the American system of government. But suppose you had the Communist Party with an actual stamp, with the actual, what do you call them? Hermesh, Magal Patish.
That you had a hammer and a sickle.
The hammer and the sickle on the flag inside the government. It's not this. I completely agree that there are those subversive elements.
It would be like the Biden administration having, a representative of the Taliban in the National Security Council, which I would argue that Meir Bitar is, but whatever.
I still think there's a line between the subversion, clandestine subversion, and the actual raising of the flag. But this is really a Talmudic argument. I don't underestimate the severity of the American case now, in days when we learned that the FBI is going to be used against parents who protest critical race theory.
Look, I think that, in terms of understanding just how horrible the situation in Israel is, all you have to really do is look at Naftali Bennett's speech at the UN General Assembly, right? Because he did not represent Israel there. He represented his post-Zionist government. He represented himself. We have a prime minister who has no constituents. A poll came out yesterday that said he has 4 mandates in new Knesset elections, which means that there's literally no way that his party can run and expect to actually get elected to Knesset. Forget about, becoming prime minister. He became prime minister with 6 mandates to his name, which is all of 5% of the seats in the Knesset. So he literally represents nobody. And it was reflected in his speech because, here he came to New York. The UN anchored the Iran nuclear deal from 2015 in a Security Council resolution, and that Samantha Power drafted. And the United States is now going into it again, or wants to desperately go into it again. So the UN wants to give the good housekeeping seal of approval to a nuclear arsenal for the most profligate sponsor of terrorism in the entire world. And a country that's on record with their official policy being that they want to annihilate the Jewish state and, by the way, destroy the United States of America. And this is the policy not only of the United States, but of the majority of members of the UN. And he didn't say anything against the nuclear deal. And, Benjamin Netanyahu talked about it yesterday at the opening session of the Knesset, but that's a big one. The day before Bennett spoke, the head of the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, gave a speech on, Zoom or whatever, where he issued Israel an ultimatum that we quit all of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem in the next 12 months, or he's going to sue us again at the ICC, at the International Court of Justice at The Hague. And Bennett thought that the better half of valor was to say nothing about the Palestinians. He was sitting in the most anti-Semitic hall in the entire world of the most powerful anti-Semitic organization in the entire world, the UN. And he said nothing to defend his own country's national interests, our rights to our capital city of Jerusalem, nothing. And why did he do that? Because he can't. Because he represents no one, he has no constituents, and B, because if he says anything, then his government will fall.
And it's very telling that, we have a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in our government, yep. And they are banned in Egypt, and they are banned in Jordan, and they
the UAE.
And they're banned around us in Arab countries. And Israel has them inside the government. It's mind-boggling, and this is why I say I think we are to an extent in a worse shape. This is not true across the board, because I think that the Israeli public, unlike the American public, is much more news conscious, and here everything is has a very strict and severe reality test. We are always the danger of war, and the war coming all the way to your door and all the way to your family, and you'll have relatives in the army, and nobody can stay away from it when it's there. Gives us a very strong reality check. So the Israeli public is actually very sober, and also non-radical. I'm looking for the word matun, but I suddenly
moderate.
It's very moderate. And so I think we have a serious weight giving balance to the whole system. But now the elites, the press, the courts, and the left in parliament have managed to band together in order to basically cancel out the will of the majority. We have a right-wing public with a left-wing government, because we have this Bernie Madoff, who is now our prime minister. There has never been such a corrupt deal like Naftali Bennett presenting himself as as a head of a right-wing party, and basically stealing a chunk of the electorate and giving it to the other side. This is nothing like that has ever happened. There were deserters, there were individual members of Knesset, but this is like a block that was just stolen. This is a political theft, and we're all acting. They say, well, he backtracked on some of his election promises. This is not backtracking on your election promises. This is stealing a block of voters, stealing it from the voters, stealing it from the sovereign of a democratic country, which is the citizens, and just giving it like it was a parcel, like it was some commodity to the other side. It's absolutely crazy.
It was really interesting because just first of all, one thing about Bennett, and then I just want to go back for a second to the Muslim Brotherhood issue, because we should close down and everything and be serious. Just as many as we are and everything. But he gave his speech at the opening session of the Knesset on Monday, and I didn't see the whole speech. I was working, but he went off. I saw the clips of it. He went off in his speech against people who tweet against him, right? And then on Twitter the next day,
me, Carolyn.
Right, or me, and me.
Yeah,
it was all about me. It was all about me. He was talking about me. No, but all of our pals in our little closed intellectual universe and in Twitter in Israel, they were like, "Look, he's reading us. Look, But the thing is that he really is. Like he is reading because he doesn't have any power. I mean, what else is he going to do? And he cannot stand the fact that he's being forced to pay a price for what he did, for his heist, for his highway robbery of the vote. He cannot stand that he's being held to account, and so he's lashing out at his voters, he's lashing out at his critics, accusing us of inciting, accusing us of being illegitimate. And it's an extraordinary thing. He's saying, I am immune from criticism. After I thumbed my nose at, the foundations of Israel's democracy, and yes, we're a proportional, parliamentary system, which is stupid, and there are a lot of real defects in our system, and I think we should have direct election of our prime minister. But any way you want to look at it, we have lots of problems. Our system is faulty, but just like the American system, it's all based on this idea of good faith, that nobody's going to come in there and pervert the rules and bend them and twist them and break them in such a way that they undermine the entire concept of our system, that nobody ever thought of doing something like this. Yeah, it's illegal, but who would have ever thought of doing something like this? It's just not done. It's that concept of just not done. But
Naftali Bennett said he would not do it. Not just, of course, that he cheated everyone.
Right, but
what I'm saying, that, but he said that he will not even try to be prime minister with less, I think, than 20.
Than 10. Or 15.
It started with 20. It went down to 15.
It went down
I didn't know if it went down to 10.
No, it went down to 15. But everything that he said was a lie. It's true. But I'm saying that the perversion of the system that he undertook, it is like Obama started with the executive orders when he said, "I have a phone and a pen." Like, yeah, you do, and you can pass these executive orders. It's true, but that's not how the system is supposed to work, right? You're supposed to have give and take with Congress. You're not supposed to be able to rule by presidential fiat. That's just not how things are done in America. And now Biden, of course, is doing it, and with all of these regulations and everything that they pass. So none of these things are supposed to be done in America. And they're all being done by the Democrats, who are undermining the system by twisting it in ways that the framers of the American Constitution never conceived of. And the whole idea of checks and balances was to block this from ever happening. And here in Israel, we're seeing people like Naftali and, of course, our justices who keep arrogating to themselves more and more power from the executive and from the legislature, which we've talked about in previous episodes. That's one thing. And I just want to, because we don't want to go over too much, and we are supposed to be an hour, and we're already a little bit over that. But the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood, and this again sort of brings us back to the beginning of the Democrats and where the Americans are. I mean, I remember I was in this conference, I don't know, Paris may have even organized it. I can't remember. It was some very mainstream or whatever. And I was thinking, why would you invite Carolyn Glick? You guys hate me. But so I was happy to be there, but surprised that they invited me. And so I'm sitting at this table, with some more kind of center right people, whose names I won't give because why bother? And we're sitting there with Richard Haas and some other sort of what is it called? Conference of Foreign Relations people, or and centrist Democrats, centrist Republicans from State Department, and this was during Obama's time, and we were talking to them, and it was actually pretty unanimous on the Israeli side that some people were saying it politely. I was saying it in my inimitable fashion, but what in the hell are you thinking supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And I think it was probably around the time of the Arab Spring. Like this, you guys are crazy. Like these are crazy policies that you're advancing here. How can you do this? And I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood, that's the parent organization, not only of Hamas, but of Al-Qaeda and of all the Pakistani jihadist organizations, of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, of the Islamic Jihad. How can you do this? This is crazy. And they looked at us with these blank expressions on their faces, like we were crazy, like there was something wrong with us. And again, this was a unanimous sense among the Israelis, and I was the right wing detritus of the Israeli side of the conversation, but I was not. I mean, I may have been the most outspoken, but everybody agreed with me, 150% that what the Americans were doing with the Muslim Brotherhood was crazy, because it is crazy. And the great tragedy is that, I fell for it too, right? I mean, I was thinking, let's have a right-wing government for 3 months. Let's just, promise them whatever and get Benny Gantz out of the Defense Department, and this crazy dual two-headed government that we're suffering from now that's paralyzing us. And if Abbas wants to bring down the government, we still have 3 months till the next elections, and there's a lot of stuff that we can do. So the concept was that you don't pay a big price for it. You get minimal return, but it's a large enough return to make it worth your while. But you're right. I mean, as time goes by, and first of all, that was one deal, and that was basically what was on the table with Netanyahu. And here we have something completely
consistently
different.
Against
and you
this.
were insistent, and you were consistently opposed to this, as was my newspaper, Israel Hayom. So, I mean, I was thinking of it more as an opportunistic thing, but the truth is that it is, and I was also kind of under the spell of the Abraham Accords, thinking that Abbas, Mansour Abbas, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood party in the Knesset, and of course it's insane that there even is a Muslim Brotherhood party in the Knesset, should never have been allowed to run, but that's a completely different discussion. But I thought that he was kind of an expression of where the UAE and the Saudis are, as opposed to where the Iranians and the Lebanese and the Qataris are. So that was what was sort of at the heart of my thinking. But now we're seeing that isn't even true. That Mansour Abbas is very much of the Muslim Brotherhood ilk of Hamas and all of the rest of them. And it would have been one thing, and it probably would have been terrible. And as we see all the time, it set a terrible precedent that Netanyahu was willing to discuss it with him, and we're paying a price for that. And that's true. But when you join together the Israeli Muslim Brotherhood with the Israeli left, which is basically controlled by the American left and by these figures in the United States who have been pushing a pro-Muslim Brotherhood anti-Israel agenda since Obama came into office in 2009. And you really do have this noxious mix. And when you look and you see where the Democrat Party is today on Jews and on Jew haters, then it all comes together, and we see that we really, we have to be concerned about the trajectory of this country and really of the free world,
Right on.
But the last thing that we'll say, the very, very last thing that we'll say before we say goodbye and subscribe to our channels and share this show with all of your friends and all that, the last thing that we're going to say is that the polls are encouraging here in Israel and also in the United States. When you look and you see the public's opposition to our government and to the government and to the Biden administration, to the Democrats in Congress, et cetera, then you see that, this will hopefully, be a painful and very costly episode in our history, but that at the end of the day, we didn't get this far in order to throw it all away because some, Madoff came in the United States and in Israel and stole our democracy through various means that were untowards and wrong. And so I think that, the polls are encouraging, and they should be a reason for hope that, we're going to pay a price for this huge thing that's happening now. But this is by no means the end of the story. And the fact that Naftali felt he had to go out against the Twitter people, me and you and our buddies in our closed little universe, means that we're not such a closed universe, and we are having an impact. And speaking out and sharing our webcast and all the rest of it with, your nodding acquaintances, all of this stuff is really important. And so I'm glad to be back with you, Gadi. I'm glad we're done.
And also an opportunity to thank you for coming up on my Hebrew podcast, because it's
that was
to
fun.
say these things to the Hebrew public as well.
Well, we had fun. It was great. All right. See you guys next week. Subscribe, share, etc., etc. Shalom. Bye-bye.